Hello, everybody. This is Debby Enoe from Teacher Success Coach with another female educator to talk to us about the challenges and triumph of online teaching during COVID-19 at the Female Educators Roundtable. First of all, I must apologize for the time I come on. The internet is very challenging. Sometimes these are some of the challenges that I'm experiencing. So could you imagine when we're actually teaching students online, we're also experiencing a lot of this. This is Debby Enoe from Teacher Success Coach. Apologies for that. My guest had a phone on. Okay. Right. Can you welcome. And thank you. And thank you very much for accepting the offer to come online. Introduce yourself, please. Tell us what you do. And yes, we know you're an educator. Can you tell us other things that you do and what country you come from, what group of students or educators you support, etc.?
Absolutely. My apologies. It's that technology thing that's trying to get used to. My name is Kanika Mobley, and I have been an educator for the past 20 years. I currently live in Brooklyn, New York, but I started my education journey in Atlanta, and I have taught in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and also in New York over the years in both traditional public schools here in the States and then also public charter schools. I have primarily worked with lower elementary, so early childhood, pre-K, all the way through second grade. That is really, I really love those youngest of students. They really are near and dear to my heart, and I probably say kindergarten is really my sweet spot. I love 5-year-olds because they're so honest. They are so open.
Too honest.
And just to see them grow from the beginning of the year into these independent, kids at the end of the year is just amazing to see, like, their growth throughout the years. But I kind of transitioned from being an in-class teacher to an instructional coach. And then I worked with the University of Chicago with their literacy assessment called STEP. And so with them, I used to work with schools across the country that were using the literacy assessment and being able to support both educators in terms of school leaders and also teachers in how to implement the assessment, but also how to then use the data to inform their instruction. And so I worked with them for a number of years until I started to transition into actually doing it independently through my company, Education is Power Consulting.
Okay. You also say to me that you're also doing some work with autism as well.
Absolutely. So I also started a company called Stories of a Colorful World with my college roommate, Vanessa, and we, based on my work in schools and also with my own son, we really thought about the challenges because I mostly worked in under-resourced communities. So trying to find stories that actually reflect and look like the students that were in my class, so they could actually experience. So many of the messages in children's book are universal and everyone can relate, but we also know that it's so important for kids to see themselves and their identity and to be able to relate into like the media of the world. And so we want to make sure that they actually get a chance to see. So what we did was we started this company to highlight those books, those diverse books where different children can really see themselves. And so we provide book recommendations, parent tips, author interviews, just a wealth of resources for parents that want to raise kids, bold, brave, and brilliant kids who love to read. And so even within there, we recently launched a newsletter, particularly for parents of preschool boys. Because we were also noticing within that work that even though there has been some growth in terms of books with diverse characters in them, there's still this sort of lag of boys of color being actually main characters in children's books for like preschoolers or babies. And so we wanted to then be able to highlight that for parents so they have an additional ability to find those as resources and then also get some insights into the authors.
Right. Thank you. Have you got, can you drop your link on the page so that if there are any parents who are interested, they could actually know how to access your site? Okay. Thank you for that. So now you support educators on the online platform.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can you now tell us how you support them, what you do with them, and how you're using this online platform? Because we've all been trying to negotiate this online platform with a lot of challenges and a lot of triumph as well, because the triumph is we now know how to use it, and how something that we know that we cannot do because it doesn't do it, So can you share with us how you're actually using it, please?
Absolutely. So right now I continue to coach school leaders. So in the building, school leaders would maybe contract me if they were noticing, let's say, lagging test scores or stagnation in teaching, and they will want support kind of really thinking about their literacy program and how to support and help raise readers. And so I would do that through professional development or coaching of the leadership teams or, grade level teams or one-on-one with teachers. And so now a lot of that has now transitioned into how do we then create those reading environments virtually?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas in the classroom, there were materials and we could support readers, but like, how do we now do it when kids might have different materials or books or access at home? How do we make it equitable for all of them?
Right. So how have you done it?
It has been a challenge, just because I love working with, particularly, like I said, lower elementary. And so really being able to find the types of texts that kids need to actually get books into their hands. And so a lot of the teachers that I work with have been using the platform Epic.
Okay.
And Epic is an online platform with books where there are a variety of texts. Teachers can assign students books on the platform. And so it definitely provides another outlet for them to actually get kids books into their hands, and they're leveled so they can also determine what they can also determine the type of text based on what kids could actually read.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, how did you have to redesign the program that you would do in the building to on the online platform?
part of it was really like sticking to like the three key ideas that I kind of ground my work in, right?
Okay.
Because in the school, the three ideas that in working with school leaders have been one, like kids need, like there has to be a protected time for kids to just read and read books, because there's a lot that happens within the classroom. And we noticed that, like, there's research, particularly by Richard Allington, that suggests like the most successful reading and writing teachers are spending half of their day with kids actually reading and actually writing.
Okay.
And so in many classrooms, even within like a 90-minute block, there's only actually 10 to 15 minutes of actual reading happening.
Why is that? Before you continue, I just need to pick this up. Why do you think it's that?
So I've found that there are a number of reasons, right?
Okay.
So sometimes part of the reason is because we want to see how kids transfer that work into being able to complete something. So we provide them with a lot of what I'll call stuff. So like workbook sheets, questioning that they have to do, where it doesn't necessarily involve them actually doing the actual reading, but it's like snippets. So they might have a paragraph, or they may have something that they have to complete, but it's more about the completion versus the actual reading and writing. Some of that also comes from like this shift, because now we're all about the data and testing. And so we want to we're transitioning, like, can they pass the test versus are they actually readers and writers?
Yeah.
And so that comes into play, and we fill that time with, activities to be able to pass the test.
So which means they're actually taught to pass the test and nothing else.
And nothing else.
It is sad, because that's the way it's happening here as well. And I also find myself, frustrated. And I say, you know what, to hell with this. I am not teaching to the exams. I need to teach them, much wider than that.
Absolutely.
Because they need to start figuring things out themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. I find it even within my own son. He loves to write, and he wants to, he actually says that he wants to be a sports writer.
Okay, fantastic.
Absolutely. But when he goes, he's in middle school. Well, he was in middle school. He's transitioning to high school now. But when he would write for school, it was so formulaic that it didn't actually show his ideas and how he really was as a writer. And so when I would ask him about it, he would say, this is what my teachers want. They like this format. This is how they taught me, and I get good grades when I write like this.
It is frustrating.
So we kind of condition where they don't get to actually show their structure or their diversity in writing styles. Become like just this formulaic, do I have this, and this? If I have this, and this, then it's fine.
Yeah. Thank you. The frustrating thing is, schools take away students' creativity. And the fact that we're now doing this online platform, I personally feel that it have given that back to students, because it means that you are able to teach very differently. Also, in terms of differentiation in the classroom, I've said that before in one of my programs. In the classroom, we do differentiation, but on the online platform, we're forced to do it more because the students are deciding what they want. They're making decisions. They're saying that I am not coming on at 9 o'clock. Forget that. My needs is not for 9 o'clock because I'm a late sleeper. I
Right.
need more sleep. So I'm going to come on at 3, 4 o'clock to see my teacher. And they've also got research. I can't remember the research actually. I need to look it up. That says that young people like to sleep. They need to sleep. So a lot of them are sleeping longer. And I think there is a school in America that have actually, supported that and saying that the school need to start later because they realize that they get more value academically from the students when they actually have the sleep and they start at 10 or 11 o'clock.
Absolutely. And there's so much research about that, particularly for middle school, high school students to say they need more of the sleep. And so we don't structure
our lessons accordingly. No.
Our lessons accordingly. We don't structure our school day accordingly for the actual needs of the students.
No, we don't. And the beautiful thing about this online platform, the student actually taking it. Because there's no way we could, we online in our home and then their home. So when we actually come online, they're not there. So they say, well, they're making us differentiate as individual.
Absolutely.
And some of them are also saying that I do not want to put my camera on because I do not feel confident enough. We have no choice. In the classroom, we're going to be saying that you have to, or you're not going to stay in my classroom, right? But they are now saying that, Miss, I'm not putting on my camera.
And that's the biggest thing and it's also difficult for us as educators too, because there's some parts of that where we like that control. We like the control of being able to structure everything just so and make sure kids are, doing what they need to do to succeed. But then this really strains that. It causes that tension because you are reliant on the student actually being able to take on more of that ownership and being able to say what their needs are and, to support them in that way.
Yeah, that is very true. So we actually forced to differentiate whether or not we want to fully differentiate as an individual child, because in the classroom, we tend to have a lot more one size fits all. But on the online platform, it is individual. We are catering for individual students.
Yep. I think that kind of goes to when I talked about like the 3 ideas that I kind of ground my work in. Like the first idea was kind of like having that protected time. The second idea is like making sure kids have access to the books they actually want to read.
Fantastic, yeah.
Because, they need to have choice and to be able to find books that are going to motivate them, that they actually enjoy, because we know that motivation matters, right? And so the biggest factors in improving reading instruction and like reading motivation is like students access to a lot of books. Like they have enough material that they can go through and read, and then their personal choice in what they read, because they read more, understand more, and are more likely to continue reading when they can choose their own books. Like I have teachers who, particularly like upper elementary, they're like, but they only want to read graphic novels. It's like, let them read graphic novels then. It's better for them to want to read something and read a lot of it, because then you can infuse in other types of books.
Exactly, yeah.
But if you don't have the motivation, then that's half the battle. So my son in particular, when he was in first and second grade, he did not want to read any fictional books. It was all nonfiction for him. He could read 100 books about frogs or animals or the Big Book of Why and read that over and over again. But if you gave him a story, he was not really interested. And so, really trying to feed into, if he enjoys this, then give him more of it, because him reading more is actually going to also make him a better reader, just because he's practicing it and going through it even more.
Yeah, thank you. The interesting thing about it is educators need to decide when students are reading, what is the purpose? Is it the purpose to get them to learn to read and enjoy, or for the sake of reading? Because I think it is also important that we allow them to read what they like to read. And this is something I had to say to in the primary school to a primary school teacher, because my son is an avid reader. He reads everything and anything. One of the things that pointed out to me, oh, you know, as a boy, boys don't like reading, but he just likes reading everything, the stereotype. So then I said to the teacher, then she said to me, a lot of the children in her class doesn't like reading. I said, but have you thought of, if they want to read cartoon, allow them to read cartoon, because the purpose is getting them to read. So when you actually get them to read and they enjoy reading, then you could actually snip in, you know, what you want them to read.
Absolutely.
But first of all, get them to start reading, to enjoy reading. And then you could start dictating. That's the challenges with school.
Absolutely.
We too quick to dictate what children should be reading instead of allowing them to. And this is again what the online platform is forcing us to do. Absolutely. To see students as individual other than as a group, and to see them as we need to cater to individual students, and all size does not fit, one size does not fit all. So this is what really is interesting, because it's actually reinforcing that. And every single thing that is happening to us on the online platform, it is actually forcing us to reflect. It has actually forced me as an educator to reflect a hell of a lot. You know, in terms of educator that support other educators, and educator as an individual, an educator who coach educators. He actually have taught me so much that it is important that we reinforce the individuality of that child. It is so important.
And I think that's one of the things, just in terms of, I think the last piece is like kids needing like that expert instruction, but we want them to have like something that's bite-sized that they can try out. And when we're delivering it to the whole class, if we know most classes have varied abilities, like unless your school creates a homogenized classroom, you're gonna have kids who run the gamut of ability. And so when we spend most of our time in front teaching one lesson to everybody, some kids, they already know it. Some kids, it's gone completely over their heads, and it's only a smaller percentage who can get it right in that time. So one of the things that I also work with like in school is getting teachers to like create that 10 to 15 minute mini lesson, and then spending the bulk of their time actually working with small groups or working with individual students to make sure that each student is really getting what they need based on, you know, where they actually are. So that's one of the things that the online platform has helped in, like, how do we then transition that into making sure that we're using the platform to do, you know, those breakout groups and making sure that kids are still working within small groups and giving like each of them what they need versus trying to deliver this one lesson knowing only a small percentage are actually going to take it in at that time.
So how did you guys work it in relationship to getting the students on the online platform to be in small groups? How did you know, how you guys did that and negotiate that?
A lot of that was coordinating with parents and creating schedules where, you know, teachers could pull together book clubs or pull together small groups on certain days, and then kids come on during those certain days. So parents would know the schedule for the book club, or parents would know the schedule for the small group sessions. And that way they deliver a whole group mini lesson, but then really the time was spent pulling those small groups together.
Right, right. So in terms of learning, how much learning have taken place? Were you able to measure it in terms of how much you think, did the educators tell you how much the students have taken in on this online platform in the small breakup group compared to in the physical classroom?
In the classroom, I think it probably varies by teacher, just in terms of everyone was kind of thrown in trying to figure out how it works. And because there was also like some reluctance to the small groups and the individual conferencing and all of those things in the classroom, for some teachers trying to then be able to do it on an online platform felt overwhelming for some. And so really trying to support not just like, I think that's the one thing about switching to the virtual learning, right? Is because not only are we thinking about the students' needs, but we're also thinking about the teachers' needs. We're also thinking about the families' needs. We're also thinking about, the school leaders' needs. How are all of those things playing into how we're coming on and showing up for kids?
Okay. So thank you. So how have you been supporting all of this?
It definitely is. I have probably had to differentiate more than I've ever had to differentiate, just because there's like thinking of just the technological aspect of it. Then also I'm really big on like the emotional connection. So, when I coach teachers one-on-one, before we can get to the learning, I need to figure out how you are. Like, how are you? Because just like with the kids, if you're not okay, then the information that I want to share with you is not going to be received, because you don't have the space for it at that time. And so really being able to support support teachers in, okay, how do I support you in feeling more confident about going into this? Then there's okay, here's the lesson. Now what do we need to do in order to make sure that kids are actually learning? And then how do you also support the students' emotional needs? Like if they're overwhelmed or their, home situation is, if they're having difficulties in their homes, then how do we also address that and support them to be able to get them to take in and learn and do all of those things?
Thank you. So how, you see, because my head is really buzzing, because I'm thinking, okay, you're on the online platform, there's issue with the home, because the child is not going to put the camera on because the child is not comfortable with people seeing the home. The educator is frustrated because the educator like control. as we know, some educators like control more than others because they like things to be right.
Absolutely.
So how does all of this connect? How do you support that? Because the educator's head is full because of the anxiety of doing it online, the pressure of having to do this online session with the students is not receptive to the whole thing. The student doesn't want to put the camera on. The educator is feeling away because we're so used to seeing students face to face and being close to them. And as we know, educators like to know that they're in control of everything. Not that they're controlling, but they know that they're able to fix everything, right? When the lesson plan doesn't go well, they're able to think on their feet and switch around. But you cannot even think on your feet here because the students have much more control than you do in this case.
Right. I think one of the pieces that has been helpful for a lot of teachers is it really is about whatever the relationship that you built with your students in the classroom, that has also transferred to out of the classroom. So the teachers that I see that are most successful, whether they know technology or not, have been the ones who had those connections and those relationships with the kids already. The ones who struggle with classroom management, the ones who struggle with like building relationships with students, regardless if they know the technological piece, whether they know the actual lesson and can implement it, they struggle most with actually being able to get kids online, to show up for class, to, you know, connect the lesson and have those pieces, because those kids who love their teachers and really wanted to come to school every day are showing up, and they're going, if they're capable of it, like if it's not a technical issue or it's not, you know, for the younger ones, it really is about even coming to school is all about the parents getting them there. And so a lot of it is they don't have as many challenges because the kids actually want to show up. They actually missed that interaction in that time in that space.
Thank you. So how would you help an educator who initially had no connection with the students in the physical classroom, but this teacher wants to connect with the students on the platform because they have the lesson to deliver?
Yep.
So how would you help an educator like that?
I would actually have them, which is the challenging part is we're always thinking like, but what is the lesson? What do I need to teach them?
Yeah.
And I would actually tell them it's really not about the teaching now. Like you have to connect with students. So like pulling students to come one-on-one, pulling students with small group, and not necessarily to deliver a lesson, but just to, are you okay? Let's talk about life. Let's talk about, you know, how you're doing. Let's talk about what you're enjoying during this time. Let's talk about what books you're reading, what you like. So really trying to make those connections, those one-on-one connections outside of the learning, right? Because we all know whether you were the greatest teacher during this time, kids are going to have some gaps because we were all learning on the fly. And so in knowing that really having kids that are emotionally well going into the fall is really going to be a lot more important than going into the fall and the kids had all of these lessons, but they didn't have the space to be able to take any of it in anyway.
So what you are saying to me is the emotional aspect is far more important than the intellectual aspect. I share that too. The psychological and emotional factors for me are far more important than the intellectual. You know, because the situation we might end up having is we have this intellectual, but the child cannot transport it into anything because the child's psychological and emotional well-being is scrambled.
I mean, this was traumatizing for all of us.
Exactly.
And so, you know, as educators, we're like, okay, but we have more to do. We have to make sure that we're okay for, you know, our students, for our own families even, you know, and so we take on a lot, but we also have to know that that the kids are going through a lot, their families are going through a lot. You know, a lot of parents I see, they're like, I didn't sign up to be a teacher. And so, and so like really thinking about like, what does that frustration then transfer from the families overwhelm to also now the students overwhelm, you know, not being able to do the things that they've traditionally been able to do. My son is a big routine guy. Like he loves routine. And so not being in school, he's the only child, so not being with friends, he, you know, loves to go to the park and play basketball, not being able to do the things that he loves, you know, that took a toll on him. And so we have to think about what is that toll that everyone is kind of taking, and then how does that play into how well they're able to take in, you know, and actually learn.
Thank you. How have you been supporting the school leaders at this time? Because one of the things you support the school leaders. So how were you supporting them? What were the support they were getting? What were the support they need? Ask you 3 questions.
So a lot of the support, particularly in the initial transition, was, okay, how do we set up this? Like, how do we manage this transition? You know, so because there were many of the schools that I work with use Lucy Culkin's units of study, which is really big on like one-on-one interaction and conferring and like doing all of these pieces. And it's harder to kind of like transition into that on an online platform for some schools who might have just been like decided to upload lessons or upload videos versus having live, you know, instruction throughout the week. So really figuring out, okay, are we sticking with the structure that we've used within school, or are we transitioning to make it easier for teachers and students? And so trying to find the balance of what are the structures that we're keeping in place and which are the ones that we're more flexible with to make sure that everyone feels successful.
So was it a situation where all the schools that you connect with, did they all use the same platform?
They did not. They use different platforms, and even sometimes within grade levels, they use different resources. So some schools actually did do, like, even the structure, some schools actually did do like live instruction 5 days a week. Some of them did like 20-minute lessons, 20-minute live lessons 3 days a week. Some just posted, particularly for like upper elementary students, like posted information into like Google Classroom, communication with students and how they would disseminate information to students. Some use platforms like Google Classroom, others use like Class Dojo, and then also resources. So a number of them use, like for books and things like that, they use Epic or Reading A to Z. And it really depended upon, for some schools and even grade levels, it depended upon with all of the changes, what did they feel like their parents would be able to get used to better. We've been doing this, and then to ask parents to sign up for another thing can be overwhelming. So we're going to just stick to what we have, as opposed to asking parents to do one more thing.
So the platform that was used, you think that it was effective in delivering the message to the students and the parents?
I do. I think for the most part, teachers definitely use those platforms to have a better communication with parents, to let them know and to like be on top of like the pieces. So it's also like some of the methods that they used in class, like if they created like a newsletter that listed like all of the homework or the class assignments or things like that, and they noticed during the in-school instruction that parents weren't necessarily reading those things.
Exactly.
During that time, sometimes having the shifting towards the online instruction, they actually were able to parents were more on top of making sure that they looked at, okay, what's the assignments for today? How can I support my child to make sure that they get in? But of course, because, you know, parents were in different and varying phases of this and abilities to kind of like support their students, you know, some parents, you know, some families needed more support than others. And it also depended upon the resources of the school to be able to have those family outreach, you know, coordinators or someone in the school to be able to not just the teacher communicate, but also someone else in the school to be a resource to also call, hey, haven't seen your son in, you know, or your daughter in a couple of days, or they haven't posted information. And so, you know, some of them also had resources to be able to reach out and make sure the families were okay.
Okay. Do you see, thank you for that. Do you feel that a lot of parents, do you know what percentage of parents were very active?
I don't know quantifiably like how many students were present, but I would say the percentage was probably close to the same percentage as like in school. Okay. So those very active parents are still going to be trying to figure out what's happening, what you know they need to support students. But then also really thinking about, and this is one of the things that still keeps me up at night, particularly as we think about what's going to happen in the fall, is those early childhood and early elementary students who need so much more. Like they need more of that active teacher engagement or parent engagement to be able to be successful. Because they can't just hop on, get their assignment, complete their assignment, and finish. Like they need more support. And so as we think about parents going back to work, or as we think about what the structure of the school will look like going into the fall, they're going to need something so much differently than when I think about my son who's entering high school. Right, him going to school 3 days a week and then getting his assignments done doesn't require, with me working and him, you know, working, it still requires involvement, but it doesn't require the level of involvement that a kindergartner would need in order to stay engaged.
That's very true.
And so that I think that might be where you also saw an uptick in parent involvement, is for like the younger students, because a lot of parents, okay, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what we're supposed to be doing here, you know. And sometimes there was the over involvement where they were completing something online or doing like a diagnostic test, and you see the results that were completely different from what you know the student is capable of
doing. Exactly. Yes.
And so I often tell, you know, talk to teachers like during this time, it's like, you're not just teaching the students, but you're also coaching and supporting the parents too. Like they have to know how to support, you know, like if you know, there are some parents who, for every word a child makes a mistake in their reading or their writing, they're going to correct them, or they're going to tell them how to spell it, or they're going to, you know, do all of these things. And so knowing our expectation is something different, how do you then coach parents? Because oftentimes a parent will say, well, I don't know, this is how I learned it. And so how do you then, if your expectation is different, how do you then coach parents and not just tell them what, you know, the kids should be doing, but also like coach and teach and like, what are the strategies that they can do if their, you know, child struggles with the word? What are the strategies they can do if their child is trying to write a word and looks at them and says, how do you spell? You know, what do you do in that situation? And so it's not necessarily just about telling them, but also what are the resources or what are the tips or what are the strategies that they can use when they come to this situation.
And thank you. The interesting thing about that is we have a lot of parents, especially the involved ones, who feel that they need to help the children as much as possible. Not just help or support, you know, give them the answers. And that's been, as you know, I've seen you shaking your head, as you know, that's always a challenge, because you say, you don't give them the answer, you encourage them to do it.
Right.
So that's one of the challenge of the online platform, especially for younger children, where the parents just feel that, oh, I don't want them to struggle, I have to. No, you don't have to.
Absolutely.
Because in the physical classroom, you are not there and they're getting it however they can.
They are doing it. And they,
exactly.
I think I experienced that so much in those years where I taught kindergarten, because, you know, my students were always independent. You know, they always rose to the level. They would go check out books, put them back, sign them out, like do all, like getting to the point, coaching them to the point where they were able to do those things independently. You know, if I needed to spend lunch breaks teaching you how to tie your shoe, I was going to spend my lunch breaks teaching you how to tie your shoe, because I was not going to tie your shoe all year. And
exactly.
And so it really, you know, showing they are capable of doing absolutely what you expect them to do if you raise the level of expectation. Like, how do you coach them and get them to that point? No, they won't be able to do it perfectly in the first time, but then how do we also encourage students to make mistakes and then support them and coach them along the way to be able to do it successfully, as opposed to always, you know, telling them what to do, because then they're not learning those lessons and are fearful of making mistakes.
Exactly, isn't it? That's one of the biggest issues there. They're fearful of making mistakes because they're going to feel that they're not good enough. Right. And that's something that I encourage my students constantly to. The object is, I want you to read, so read. It doesn't matter the mistakes. I want you to talk. It doesn't matter if you get the answer right or wrong. The objective is to talk. You see, we need to encourage students to embrace the mistakes.
Absolutely. I mean, that's life.
Exactly.
We make mistakes every day. And I mean, that also transitions to us as adults being fearful of making mistakes and putting ourselves out there and, you know, saying something that we're, you know, not confident, you know, about. And so it starts from when we're young and we hear those messages and we learn that along the way, that it's not okay to make mistakes, but you're not going to learn if you don't make mistakes.
Exactly. And the sad thing about it is, when children get to secondary school, because I haven't taught primary school for years now, they are so fearful of making the mistakes. And you're saying to them, it doesn't matter. I just want you to gain confidence in speaking.
Right.
So just speak. But you see, the sad thing about it is, when the children actually come to us in primary and nursery school, they've always been told don't or no. So they actually grew up with in the head, no. We tell children no more than we tell them yes.
Right.
And as a result of this no, there actually becomes this program in the head of the no. And the fear of actually doing anything, because there's so big fear of the mistake, making the mistake, that they have been told, okay, when you make the mistake, that's fine.
Right.
When they make the mistake, no, you've got it wrong. And how do we expect them to make mistakes? How do we expect them to take chances?
Right. Right.
They won't, because a child who's been told so many no's, either from the home or in the nursery school, etc. When the child actually comes into secondary school, that child failure to take chances is so high.
Right.
The child is so afraid of taking chances because the child is so afraid of getting the no's.
Yeah.
Because I see it all the time, because I no longer teach early years or primary school. I now teach, students who are going on to A levels, or students who are 16 and 17. And when I'm saying that, okay, it's okay, but miss, I might get it wrong. I don't care. You see, and that's what been programmed in their head, that you've got to get it right. Because if you don't, it means that you are not good enough. We have to start empowering students to remind them that whatever you do, you are good enough.
Absolutely.
And it is so frustrating, because this is an exercise I do with my students. Anytime my first meeting with students, I said to them, I want you to take out a pen and paper and write, I am good enough. And they look, what do you mean? I said, keep on writing. I want you to repeat it. You need to repeat that. It's your mantra. I am enough. I am enough. You need to repeat that. So when I actually ask you a question, it doesn't matter what it is. You just tell me an answer. It doesn't matter if you feel that it may not be right. That's okay. Because my objective is to get you to feel confident in speaking out.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I take, not that I started with students, but then also find that it works with teachers as well. In my work, is that I always ask whoever I'm working with, explain what you just said. I'm not, explain, why do you think that? My favorite question is, why do you think that? Why do you think that? And so oftentimes, whether it's student or adult, they think my why do you think that means that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And I say it whether I agree with what you responded or whether I disagree. I want to hear your thought process, and your thought process is more important to me. How you got there is more important to me than the answer.
Yes.
Because I learned so much more from how you processed than from what you received.
Yeah.
What was the final outcome?
Yeah.
So I always use that, but it's always funny to me, particularly with adults when they clamor or like backtrack on their response, because they've been trained and programmed to, if I'm asking you to explain yourself, then you think automatically you said something wrong.
Yeah. That is so very true. That is so very true. Because many times I have to say to educator, when I ask you to explain, I'm not interested, that doesn't mean you get it wrong. And I have to say the same thing to the student, because I say to you why you've said that. That doesn't mean you're wrong. I just want to know, as you rightly said, the reasoning behind it, because maybe that's a way I did not think of it that way.
Absolutely.
You see, that's the thing about it. You see, that's what I said from the start. Children have been programmed from baby, the no. If you check how many times a child have been told no, to how many times a child have been told yes, there are far more no's than there yeses. Absolutely. And no's also mean that you get it wrong and it's not good enough.
Right.
So when you actually listen to parents or listen to the child, and that's what the child would always say to you, no, there's no explanation in some cases. It's no. And it's quite challenging, because it means that this program, this child from young have carried this program all the way. And this child is running this program until they even get to secondary school. And when they get to me, sir, stop. It's like, miss, what do you mean? No, I'm not interested in your answer. I'm interested in you feeling confident in speaking in my lesson.
Absolutely.
And you also have to realize that it doesn't matter what answer you give me, you are enough.
You are enough.
And It's a real challenge, and it's interesting that you were saying that in terms of the educators.
Absolutely.
It's constant because they too have been, running this program.
Absolutely. For how long,
Yeah.
and then particularly as adults, we have so many more messages,
Mm.
where we feel, particularly in education, which is predominantly women, and feeling like inadequate and not enough and like all of those things. And then how do we then make sure that we're filling our own, buckets, as we also support our students, support our families, support all of these things? How do we make sure that we take the time? Because as educators, we're giving so much that we often put ourselves last. And so then how do we make sure that we're, not feeling selfish for actually taking time for ourselves? Or when we're asked to do that one more thing in school, when we know that we're at our capacity,
Exactly.
how do we say no?
Yeah, and feel okay.
This is where I spend my time, and this is where I want to, make sure that I'm doing the best work that I can do, and I'm also, supporting myself.
So could you imagine what that have been like on the online platform?
Right.
Where, educators, it's interesting because that's the reason why I say to you, how do you support the educators and the leaders? Because you see, they're also feeling that they're not good enough in terms of the platform.
Right. And I think that's one of the things, like in my work with teachers, is they hear me say time after time after time, you have to be flexible. It's okay. If you can only do one thing, what is that one thing going to be? Like, yes, there are so many other things that you want to accomplish, but if there's one thing that you can be better at within this time, within this week, within this month, within this 3 months, what is that thing? That's the thing that we're going to focus on, because we can't do everything. We can't be good at everything. And especially when we think, I know here in the States for, elementary teachers, you have to be an expert at reading, at math, at science, at social studies, at
Exactly.
How do you be an expert at all of those things? All of those things are not going to work towards your strength. And so how do you really think about what are the things that I'm really strong with, and then what are the things that I also need support with, and being comfortable to be able to say, like, how do I make sure that I'm giving students what they need, knowing this is not necessarily my strength?
Thank you. The interesting thing about that is, one of the reasons why I feel in terms of the online platform, and some educators have had a number of challenges, because they've always been told that you have to be good at it, and you are either superhero or we're not super nothing.
Nothing.
No, I'm sick and tired of this. Oh, teachers are superheroes. No, because what you're doing is you're actually setting up yourself to fail.
Absolutely.
You can't, you're not. Because as a result of that, a lot of educators really begin to hate the online platform. And I'm sure you probably have got a lot of educators who were so fearful of actually doing the online platform.
Yes. So many teachers I know, particularly if they were recording their lessons, how many hours they spent recording and re-recording and re-recording and re-recording some more in order to get it just right, because they wanted to give students something that was quote unquote perfect.
Exactly.
And kids were learning, families were learning this, teachers were learning this, and I think the biggest lesson is everybody had to give everyone grace.
Yeah.
Everyone was trying to figure it out. I know in the early, the start of the shutdown, One of my sons, his ELA teacher, was just really struggling with the technology. And so these were 8th grade children who were like coaching her through. Unmute yourself. You have yourself muted. Turn on your camera, you know. And so the students became the teachers in some cases.
Exactly.
Because they felt more comfortable with it and could actually help and support. But if you didn't feel, if you didn't feel comfortable with not being the one who's actually doing the teaching, and then being vulnerable enough to let students help you in the places where they're strong, it was a challenge or difficult.
Yeah, because not every educator would, fully accept a student actually taking them through, because some educators have it in their head that they are super whatever. And I feel that it is so very important that educators demonstrate to students their vulnerability, because you need to remember, first of all, you're human. So therefore, you're bound to make a range of mistakes. I'm the first one to put my hand up in terms of technology. And I keep on saying all the time, and I used to teach, IT, but yet still, I'm a mess at IT. I know that sometimes I used to be going to the class and I'm saying to the student, okay, how do you do text wrap? And I'm supposed to be teaching them text wrap. Really? You see, so you need to be vulnerable and be prepared to ask your student, because that doesn't mean that you're not the teacher. It means that you don't know all the answers, and it is okay.
Absolutely. And they also need to know that, because it's also us like changing the framework that we need to constantly fill kids with something as if they don't already come with something. Like as if they don't already have experience, as if they don't have perspectives that they can also share with us to help us develop a understanding of how they experience things, or a better method. So I take, for instance, I remember when my son was in 1st grade and I was trying to teach him how to count money. And I had always taught my students to start with the larger coins first and then go to the smaller coins. Well, he didn't need that. He can go from a penny to a nickel to a dime to another penny to a quarter with no problem. And I'm looking at him in amazement, because
exactly.
Like, you're 6. How do you know how to do this?
Yeah, exactly.
But just thinking like the strategy that worked for me may not have been the strategy that worked for him. And we also have to think about that when we're working with our students. Just because this is how we learn, or this is what we need, doesn't not necessarily mean that every student needs that, or that they don't already come with their own strategies to be able to figure something out, or figure it out in a different way than the way that we're actually trying to teach them. But they're still coming up with the same outcome.
Yeah.
So how do we then support that, or make room for that?
That is so very true, because that actually have demonstrated itself on the online platform.
Absolutely. It definitely, the online platform definitely gives like the space for kids to be able to do more of that creation, or teachers to have those conversations with students to figure out more about like how they're thinking, how they would do it, and kids have more of the freedom to try out different things the way that they would learn it. Which also comes with like the challenges too of being home with families, and for kids, parents telling me to do it one way, teacher telling me to do it one way.
Yeah.
So I either don't know what to do, I'm just going to do it my way.
Yes, exactly, isn't it? So in the end, the child have actually decided to differentiate, right? Exactly. I'm not listening to parents, I'm not listening to teacher, I'm doing it my way, how I think I ought to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is so very true, because that's what I've had with my son. in terms of, he doing things. It's like, oh, well, this is how me say, and this is how you say.
Absolutely.
I don't like either of them. I'm going to do it how I want to do it. Okay, that's fine. As long as you arrive with the right.
As long as you're accomplishing it, as long as you're getting
exactly.
it done, fine.
Exactly. And I must say, this is what the online platform have actually clearly demonstrate, enable the students to be far more creative than we were allowing them to be in the physical classroom.
Absolutely.
And
I think that's one of the, I think for, educators who actually, you couldn't see it in the beginning because everyone was in the weeds. But I think like as it transitioned, if you could actually see moving to the virtual as like the gifts that it brought, right? And like had more, in some cases, more times in terms of flexibility where it didn't feel like your schedule was dictated or you had to do it in a certain way. You had, for some educators, the ability to be more creative that you, for some, could not necessarily do within the classroom. And this was definitely an opportunity because for most of our, I would say for many of our schools, schools had not been serving certain populations of students in a way that will make them most successful. And so the virtual learning actually provided opportunities if, the education, if educators were willing, or if, school leaders or district leaders had the foresight to be able to use this time, because it disrupted everything. Use this time to actually think about how can we do this better for kids who were not necessarily serving in the best ways or in the ways that they needed, in the in-school setting. Like, what can we do provided that now everything is disrupted? So what can we do now to make changes to support, whether it's we go into hybrid methods, or whether it is, we do more of the individual and small groups, or like, how do we make sure that we're serving all of our kids in the best way and not thinking in the same boxes that we have been for X number of years.
Yeah, it is so very true, because as I kept saying, every industry have moved with the technological age except education.
Absolutely.
And COVID have actually forced education to transition, because when we go into classrooms, the way the classroom is set up, the way everything is in the classroom just remind me of when my grandparents was at school. No change. But this have actually forced us to transition into technology how we ought to, because all other industry have done that. And they've actually left education behind, whereas education should have taken the lead, because education is necessary for everybody, because behind everybody and every career is education. But yet still, it was the last to transition.
Absolutely.
And they did not transition voluntarily. COVID have forced them to transition.
Right. And I think that's the best gift, right? It's like you're forced to do things differently. And so why not take this opportunity to do them better now that you can't go back to the same ways that you're doing? And like our brains are actually shifting to be more flexible in ways things can work. Because if you would have told anyone a year ago, okay, we're going to transition in less than 5 days into virtual learning, no one would, you're crazy.
Exactly.
You're absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And so like, we've done things that we thought we couldn't do. So why not think of other things that we think we can't do to be able to support students in a better way?
Yeah, that's so very true, because, it's like if you had said to educators, oh, well, you're going to transition to the online platform in 5 days. they would have been so fearful of changes. There would have been so much issues. There would be, oh, I can't do this. I can't. They
protesting in the streets.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a situation they had no choice. Hello, you need to teach your students. You just need to get on with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we figured it out. We figured it out, and we made it work. And we're still making it work, and we're still figuring out better ways to do it, because it's still in its infancy, right? And if educators have transitioned and done what they have done in this short amount of time, and this was like, okay, we're roughing it in a sense. So if we're not in the stage of like having to build the house, trying to live in the house while we're trying to build it, then what can we create when we have time to plan and time to think and time to really think about what are some of the best ways? We know the capabilities of the online platforms. We know the disadvantages of online platforms. Like, what do we do in order, if we really had time to think about what our students needed, what do we do in order to support them better? And also support families. Yeah.
So did you, let's say, in your support of educators, were you supporting families, or the educators were supporting families?
The educators were mostly supporting families, and it was mostly, for me, it was mostly coaching, educators around how do you then go in and then support families? What are the things that you can do in order to make sure that families are set up, that they feel comfortable and confident, that they have what they need also to be able to support their students.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
Oh, no, I was saying to support their children.
Yeah. Okay, can you give us can you give us 3 tips?
So 3 tips. I would say the biggest tip is to definitely use the time initially, particularly with students in your online platform, to really get to know your students. So how do you build those relationships virtually? Because we know it's not the same as when you're in the classroom. So then what are the types of things? What are the types of things you did when you were in the classroom to build those relationships? And then how do you then transition those if you were doing those? Or what are the things that you need to think about in order to build those relationships with both students and also with parents? Because we cannot do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Silo. We need each other. We can't do it without parents, and they can't do it without us. So how do we build those relationships and make sure that we have pieces in place to make sure that everybody, feels supported, feels successful going into next year? I also think that because I'm always everything, literacy, really trying to find out, like, based on getting to know your students, it's like, what do they like to read? How can you find ways to create that virtual reading environment, right? And so, like, do you show that reading is important? Like, do you have in your space to show, like, hey, these are the things that are important to us in this classroom culture, virtually or not? Like, how do we then get to those pieces, and finding ways to get books like into kids' hands? So I say there are a number of like online platforms, Reading A to Z, Epic, talking to parents about the types of, because parents are still trying to find resources. So like the types of books to have parents like get into kids' hands. Also, like thinking about, I know here in New York, there are a number of organizations that donate books to like educators or to families. And so Like, how do you find organizations that can get books to your kids, or like a donors choose or something like that, who can, you know, get books to kids. So like finding outside of the box opportunities and ways to get materials and resources to your kids, even if you're like your school doesn't have the resources to be able to do it. So that's one of the things that I would also, you know, think about. And third, it's going to be okay.
I like that one. I like that.
Okay. Regardless of whatever happens, it is going to be okay. And so, like, giving yourself grace, knowing we are learning this, and so we are going to make mistakes, and we're going to figure things out. And every day, give yourself, you know, forgive yourself 100 times, and then forgive yourself 100 more times once you get to 100, you know. So know that we are transitioning this space. And so transition takes, you know, it's going to take time, and we're in our infancy of it. So really think about what are those key things that are important.
Yeah.
And be okay with the other pieces not being perfect. If you can do one thing right, if you want your kids to know one thing, what is that one thing? If you want your kids to come out of this next year with established, having these pieces in place, what are those foundational pieces that you know you want kids to be to come away with? And then what are the pieces that you would like to have but can find some peace with it being okay if they're not perfect?
Yeah. The question is there anything called perfection? No. I feel progression.
Absolutely.
Yep. Progression, process. There's nothing that, you know, perfection is individual perception of what is perfection, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why it's like really honing in on what are your goals, one for yourself, and then also for your kids. Like, because if you can articulate what those are, write them down, you know, have them posted, something to say, this is one, even if it's, I want to jump on Zoom one time.
Yes.
Without everyone being muted, or without, you know, something specific. So knowing like each piece being able to feel a sense of accomplishment from. And then also being able to show that with students. Like, I want them, I know they're going to come in with so many varying needs. But for this month or for this quarter, I want to make sure that they actually establish this, and then we can move on to another goal. But really being able and clear about what those pieces are.
Thank you. I think that is so important. You know, identifying what the pieces are and feeling okay with whatever the outcome is.
Right.
And, you know, educators need to, especially female educators, you guys need to make sure that it's whatever you do, it's good enough. It's enough. Stop pressuring yourself. You are not no superhero. The mere fact that you're an educator, that is a superhero, you know.
Absolutely.
Right? And you need to own that. And whatever it looks like for you, you need to own it. Too often we are under pressure, so much under pressure that the most important factor of self-care, we're not even taking care of ourselves. We're taking care of everybody else except us. If you are not filled up, there is no way you could pour out. You need to be filled up to enable you to pour out. Educators, you need to embrace where you are. You need to stop pressuring yourself as to you are not good enough, you should have done that, you should have done. No. Embrace where you are on the online platform.
Absolutely.
We have come a long, long way. We have done well. We now need to celebrate it because we were not taught in schools when we were training that this is how an online platform works. We had to, as most things, figure it out. As most of the caps we wear, like counselors, therapists, parents, you name it, we wear all of those. We have not been trained in all of those. We actually gather the experience on the way. And we do it. So in the same way, we've gathered the experiences and the understanding of the online platform on the way. We need to celebrate where we are. And I ask you, educators, to find the triumph in the online teaching, because there are a lot, if you're honest with yourself through reflection. Reflect and be honest with yourself and say, yes, as much as you don't want to own up that there were pluses on the online platform, I know that you know that. Embrace it and celebrate it.
Absolutely.
Have you got anything else you want to say?
I would just say thank you to everyone. I mean, the fact that educators have stuck in there just shows like the passion that we continue to have, the mission that we have that's beyond this being a job, right? Yeah. It's like that purpose is so important. And so we definitely have to celebrate that and know that this is bigger than this year, next year, this, this grade. It really is about how do we continue to serve our communities.
Yeah, I like that. Yes, thank you. How do we continue to serve? And we need to remove it from our head: perfection, progression, process. Right? How do we continue to serve our students? And yes, I've been told, people keep on writing that, people keep on telling me, not everybody could be a teacher. I hear you. I understand. Right? But there are far more passionate and purpose-driven educators than the educators there that are there just for the money, because education doesn't pay a great deal. Right, so
they don't stay around for very long.
Exactly. And some of us that have been in the profession for over 10 years, there is a reason. We obviously feel that it's a purpose, it's a passion.
Absolutely.
And we're driven. I know I'm driven. I could talk for years on education. I could talk on education with a passion. I love it because I feel that I am serving my students. And as educators, anytime we go anywhere, we're always looking for resources to make our lesson and our student understanding greater. That's what educator does.
Always. Sorry. I said always teaching, no matter whether it's in the grocery store, at home, or everywhere. There's always a lesson.
Exactly. We are once an educator, always teaching. That is so true. That is so true. Everywhere you go, you are teaching.
Absolutely. That's something that my son actually texted me one time. I was trying to tell him something, and he said, once a teacher, always a teacher.
Exactly. It is so true, because we have our children say to us, you're not teaching now, I'm always getting that, you're not teaching now, because when you actually say something to somebody, the way you explain it,
it comes out. It's just who you are.
Exactly. So that in itself is saying to us that we are purpose driven and passion driven, Thank you, everybody, for coming onto the platform, for listening, either listening to the replay or have actually logged on while we were talking, etc. I do encourage you to like, to share. It is so important that you share what we're saying. To like, share, and there's something else I can't remember. To like and share and comment. Like, share, comment. Because what we are saying in terms of education it not only helps us in terms of expressing how we have negotiated the online platform, we are also connecting to some of the things that we do as educators. So we are looking at this twofold, our triumph and challenge of online teaching, and also some of the things we do as educators. So those are things people get information out of, because what we say, we are sharing our own experiences. Nobody's sharing our story for us. We are doing it ourselves. So you're hearing it from us, how we actually do things. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll be back on tomorrow with another educator. I think this one is from Africa, I'm not sure. But there's sometimes, as I keep saying, we will have some challenges with the internet. As much as I would love to just come on at 6 and just go straight on, most of my educators are not from the UK. My educators are globally. As a result of being a global platform, it means that we will sometimes have the challenges of the internet, because not every area have internet that is fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a fantastic evening. Stay safe and stay blessed.